J.D. Vance is taking his attacks on Vice President Harris up a notch. This weekend, he compared her to Jeffrey Epstein. Let's watch.
Because the American people just don't buy the idea that Kamala Harris, who has been vice president for 3.5 years, is somehow going to tackle the inflation crisis in a way tomorrow that she hasn't for the past 1,300 days. Giving Kamala Harris control over inflation policy, Shannon, it's like giving Jeffrey Epstein control over human trafficking policy. The American people are much smarter than that. They don't buy the idea that Kamala Harris represents a fresh start. She is more of the same.
Vance went on to say Republicans shouldn't be worrying about any polls that show Harris leading, saying that they were meant to drive down Republican turnout and create infighting.
Meanwhile, Democratic Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear had a different reaction to Harris's economic policy rollout. He compared her to Teddy Roosevelt. Let's watch.
This isn't about trying to price fix. It's just making sure that the economy is operating the way it should, that this is really supply and demand, which we all respect. It's no different than what Teddy Roosevelt did in breaking up monopolies. It's just making sure we have the right regulations and tools in place to make sure everybody is playing the game fairly.
So, the Epstein, I mean, that's just a metaphor, right? Saying that she's as bad as he was in terms of that issue. It was a fine line. It's not saying that she, is Jeffrey Epstein.
Weird thing to say when Trump's riding around on Epstein's old jet.
Yeah, Trump had some Epstein interactions, as did the Clintons, as did Bill Gates. Lots of famous, powerful, influential celebrity people. Very, very bad.
No, I mean last week.
Did what?
So a Trump, or rather Republican mega donor bought Epstein's jet when he died or was gifted it, and now it's branded Trump 2020 and Trump's been flying on it.
How about that?
How about that?
Well, the jet itself is not the thing that committed the appalling crimes against underage people. The jet is a piece of technology.
But weird that they're all friends, Robby.
It was, well, it's more than weird because it was deliberate.
Yeah.
It was Jeffrey Epstein's attempt to use his wealth to influence and blackmail powerful people on both sides of the political spectrum. And yes, it would be great to have candidates not tainted and powerful financial people, operating the levers of our society who are not tainted by association with this disgusting man. But here we are.
Yeah. So Vance saying that is a little bit ridiculous. He says the corporate people are smarter. No, not that part. The inflation point. Not the Epstein point, but the larger thing of saying...
Well, his point is that people don't like...
being taxed with inflation would be like, having Epstein be in charge of human trafficking. He's obviously insinuating that Kamala Harris caused inflation, which is ridiculous because comparing Q1 numbers of 2020, we see that all around the world, Israel, Greece, Portugal, Estonia, Denmark, Belgium, Finland, all of these countries went from having their inflation go from 5 times as much, 2020 to 2022 first quarter, to 25 times as much. Kamala Harris didn't do that as vice president all around the world. The American people are actually smarter than taking J.D. Vance's horrible talking point. It makes no sense to say she caused global inflation.
Kamala Harris didn't cause global inflation, but the Biden administration's economic policies in our country did. And yes, there was inflation in other countries too, because their leaders also failed to control inflation and have done many of the same bad policies, or the worst policies, I would argue, that she's been proposing that are going to be even more inflationary. I mean, let's talk about what she said she's going to do. Encouraging more people to buy homes at a time where the housing constraint, we have constraint on how many houses are available in many parts of the country, many of our cities, some states like California. And if you're just giving money to people to do that, then you're going to actually inflate the price of housing. It's not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. We need to make it easier to build houses by getting rid of particularly zoning regulations and other things, have more higher buildings. We have a height cap in D.C. That's why we have a housing crisis here. Way more people who want to buy houses than there are houses available. You don't fix that problem by giving people money in order to try to buy houses. Similarly, the price gouging thing, everywhere it's been tried, it's previously tried by Richard Nixon, results in mass shortages. And so I think these are extremely discredited economic ideas. These are economic ideas that majorities of economists say are bad and have said are bad for decades. And so she's getting a little bit of pushback, even from Democratic-aligned economic thinkers. I saw, for instance, Catherine Rampell at the Washington Post, who's an economic writer for them, saying that, yeah, these are not good ideas. And then she kind of softened it later because I think she got a lot of blowback from pro-Harris people to say, well, okay, well, maybe it's just antitrust and antitrust is fine. Well, these are different ideas than antitrust. These are not antitrust ideas.
Well, I don't think J.D. Vance is going to be able to convince the American people, which again, they're smarter than thinking this, that the housing crisis is caused by a supply problem. In San Francisco, which has one of the worst populations of people experiencing homelessness, they had a number of vacant homes in 2019 of 40,000. This is 4 times the estimated homeless population. It increased 52% to 60,000 in 2021. These are not homes that are unlivable. These vacant homes are homes that were very recently occupied. They are livable homes. We don't have a supply problem. We have a greed problem and a corporate investor problem in the housing market. Not just because investors in many places are purchasing 30% of homes, pushing out buyers that are actual families that would live in them, not use them for profit. We also have the problem of rents being inflated by corporate investors purchasing rental homes and manipulating their cap rate. Now, the cap rate is a calculation which determines what the rental property is worth to someone. So if they are to say this property, fills units at a rate of $25,000 to $3,500, that's the rental rate. We're going to make a calculation. Some investment firm purchases it. Typically, they're flipping real assets like rental properties over 8 to 10 years. They want to show a 5 to 10% increase or return for their shareholders and their investors at their hedge fund. So, if someone in the area cannot afford the rent as it's currently marked, those units sit vacant because they would rather sell the property in 8 to 10 years at a profit than accept someone as a renter for a lower rate because that will decrease their valuation of their property. That's what we're dealing with, is the financialization of the economy making homes unaffordable.
I don't think the housing crisis is mostly driven by corporations buying up the existing housing supply. We could expand the housing supply. We could do that if it wasn't regulated to death. Do you know how hard it is to build a new building in California, for instance? You get attacked by everybody who lives in the neighborhood, who can shut down. There's tremendous power shifted to local bureaucrats to thwart all new development, because the people who already own houses, not just the corporations, people own the houses. They want to keep their housing prices artificially high, and they need the government's help. Not the corporate sector. They need the government's help to keep their prices high to thwart all new development. And it's written into law that they can do that because you have to get commission, neighborhood, local approval. If we got rid of all of that, mostly has to be done at the state level, not the federal level. If we get rid of all of that, you could build bigger buildings, and then you would drive down the prices. If there's a very small supply of houses, and then I guess, yes, if the supply is very small, you have corporate people come in, buy them, choose not to rent them for some reason, although that seems quite far-fetched to me. They do want to rent them, and it's if there's more availability.
That's how cap rate works. This is how all corporate investors who own those big buildings operate their rental properties. This is what's pushing people out of rents because they can't afford them. No, they leave units vacant unless people will pay the high rent price. This is what inflates rent prices. So even if in a situation where in California, in cities like San Francisco, where you have 60,000 vacant units, 13 to 15% of homes, no one is occupying them. The problem is not on the supply side. The problem is corporate greed in the housing sector that needs to be reined in.
On the supply side. Well, but you're not. Do you not accept that if there was a larger supply of houses, the price of the houses would come down?
No, because the issue is that all new developments are owned by investors. You don't have small landlords able to purchase properties in an environment where prices are inflated this much and interest rates are as high as they are.
But the lack of supply is what does that.
No, that's not what does that. There's 13 to 15% of vacant homes. There's a surplus of supply. This is not a supply constraint issue.
It is, but it is a supply straight, right? The ones that are owned by the private investors because there aren't enough, but there aren't. You've made it too hard to build other units.
The existing units are empty. Why would building more units solve a supply issue when we already have extra?
Because if they're doing what you're saying, and they're keeping a supply of units, you could then create more units for the people because they don't have access to those ones because they're not going to sell them or rent them.
But we've already had the exposure of a collusion to keep prices high among corporate landlords, the landlords that own these big multi-family units, 50 units or more. That's why Kamala Harris is proposing a 5% cap on price increases, because they're keeping prices high and they're raising them.
Every time
so
they
that the
do
landlords
that, we end up
collude
with
together
shortages of
to
these
keep
things.
the prices high. And if someone will not rent the unit because they can't afford it, because nowhere in America today can you afford the median rent at a minimum wage salary. That's just reality. And so people can't afford these units, they're not renting them, and the rental properties keep them vacant rather than lowering the rent because they want to keep the price of the property high. This is why even large developments have vacant units today.
All right, we'll continue to discuss that on Rising. That does it for us today on the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll have more DNC coverage coming up later, and please like, share, and subscribe below so you can catch us wherever podcasts are available. See you tomorrow.
Bye, y'all.